Coming up next on the Wet Fly Swing podcast.
One of the board members in the museum did a book called The Fly Fishermen of Caldwell County, and he had promised one of the guys that knew Capweesey real well that he would tell their stories. And there were some people that didn't make the deadlines and felt like they were left out, and he promised to do another book. He's gotten up in years and really has lost, you might say, the desire to do the project. And so Gretchen come to me and asked me to pick it up.
That was Alen Baker with the story behind his next book project, Lefty, Kreh, David Whitlock, and the famous anglers of the Southern Appalachians. Today on The Swing.
Welcome to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show, where you discover tips, tricks, and tools from the leading names in fly fishing today.
Hey, how you doing today? Thanks for stopping by the show. Quick shout out to the schoolfishing.co. This is the place where you can go and check out our travel program. We've got new trips going on all year long. Today's episode is sponsored by Togens Fly Shop, who provides superior quality products at an affordable price. An amazing resource for fly tying materials, tools, and fishing accessories. Since 2005, Togens has been over-delivering on price, service, and passion. And now you can check out that Togens buzz for yourself. Right now, you can head over to wetflyswing.com/Togens to get started. That's Togens. You support this podcast by clicking through that link to Togens online. Today's episode is sponsored by Daiichi Fishing Hooks, a leader in the fly fishing industry and still the world's sharpest hook. Tempered with carbon-rich steel, Daiichi offers superior penetration without compromising the hook's structural integrity. You can head over right now to wetflyswing.com/Daiichi and check out what they have going and check out these killer hooks. That's Daiichi, Daiichi. Alen Baker is here to take us into the Fly Fishing Museum of the Southern Appalachians. We discover who some of the most famous people are of this region, why they have a drift boat in the museum, and how they're different and similar to some of the other museums around the country. Always a good episode when we touch on drift boats. So here we go. Alen Baker from flyfishingmuseum.org. How you doing, Alen?
I'm doing great.
Great. Great to have you on here today. We're going to dig into the Fly Fishing Museum of the Southern Appalachians, and we're going to dig into the story there. You've got a new building coming. You've got a bunch of stuff, it sounds like, new on the horizons. But before we jump into that, take us back real quick on fly fishing. I always like to hear how you got into it. Let's hear your story real quick.
I was building a place on Sugar Mountain for skiing and trying to figure out what I was going to do the rest of the year up there. And the guy named Joe Hendricks tying flies on TV. And so I went to the fly shop. It's called Jesse Brown's, and signed up for a class and tied my first fly. Came a week later to the class, and they were so busy in there, they wanted me to teach the class. So I jumped in pretty quick on fly tying, and I tied flies for the winter and then started trout fishing that next spring. Is back in 1981.
There you go, 1981. And how many years was that now? It's getting hard to add up, right? 81.
40 some, maybe. 42.
Exactly, 42 years ago. So you got in a long time ago. And
42 years.
42 years. And then how did
when I was growing up, I was just too poor to fly fish. I did, worm bait fishing type things, and didn't get it when I was younger, and I wish I had.
Right. But still, even that, 42, I mean, that's, or 42 years ago, that's still quite a while ago. So you've been doing it a while. And then how did the museum, this museum come to be? I know you've got some new things going on this year. Where did that idea start?
It was kind of a dare. Went to Nova Scotia, fly fish for Atlantic salmon with a friend. And turns out our guide was president of the Salmon Museum on the Marguerite up there. So I got a week full of interesting information about the museum. We went to visit one day, and I was pretty much struck by it. Felt like we needed to do something like that in the South, and particularly for the Southern Appalachians.
There you go. Well, first, let's start with the Atlantic salmon really quick, because that's always an interesting topic. What was that trip like? Were you able to hook into a few fish?
Oh, tough trip. My buddy after about an hour on Chance Pool, I hadn't even gotten a strike. He steps up, second cast, hooks a 9.5 pound Atlantic salmon. And that was, unfortunately, the fish for the week. I did catch some par, caught a lot of brook trout, broke off some salmon, but it was not one of those trips where you can, walk away and say, I caught this big fish. But it was a fun trip.
Yeah. What was cool about the trip other than the, you had the fishing, but other than that, what was cool about the trip?
The Margaree is, like a place set back 200 years from civilization. People there have the internet. They eat through the winter because there's no work there, but they do well. Guiding on the river is a big part of life there. I mean, everybody should live there probably, but it's a good thing they don't. It's really a neat place.
Right. So that's Nova Scotia. That is a cool part. And how far is that from you? What was that like from where you live, which is in North Carolina, right, to get up there?
Yeah, 31-hour drive.
Right. Did you actually did you drive up there?
We did. We wanted a 4-wheel drive up there. So I drove up, and my buddy flew into Halifax. And it was a good thing because they had flooding that year, and 4-wheel drive was essential to get to a lot of the pools.
Oh, wow. I'm not totally familiar with that. Is that an area where anybody can go up and fish? Is it kind of public waters?
It is public water, and it's rare because most of Canada, you have to be associated with one of the hotels and, get the permits and everything.
Gotcha. Nice. Well, this is starting off good because we've got a lot of people that love swinging flies, and I'm assuming that was was that the technique out there, sitting swinging flies all day?
Yes. We used salmon patterns, all the pretty flies. In fact, at Chance Pool, I'd probably gone through 6 or 8 flies before Ron stepped up and caught his on a blue charm. So.
Yeah. And what was your rods, like length and all that stuff?
Let's see. I was using a 8-weight most days. I did go to a 9 one day, but and I used a spay rod for the first time while I was up there. The guide brought one, and we used it for about half a day. And I decided I didn't like spay. It's just swinging too big a bat, it seemed like.
Too big bat, yeah. That's right. Well, the cool thing is I'm not sure when you went up there, but since, the last few years, well, it's been...
This was... When was 2010?
Oh, yeah. So 2010, yeah. The things have changed big time. So people are using now, like 10-foot rods for spay rods, right?
Yeah.
So it's pretty cool. But nice. So basically you had this cool trip. I wanted to dig into a little bit today is we have what you have going with the museum. And I maybe wanted to frame this a little bit by talking about the people in your area. Maybe just describe, first of all, the area, what your museum covers, and then let's dig into more from there.
Okay. Geographically, we consider Southern Appalachian to be from a little bit of mountains in Alabama, includes Georgia, Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina, not a whole lot of mountains in South Carolina, Kentucky, Virginia, West Virginia, and a little bit of Maryland, technically south of the Mason-Dixon line. And it takes in a lot of mountain areas, but the whole idea was to have most of the museum focus on the people and the methods of, fly fishing in the mountains. And we've stayed pretty close to that. We've got a couple of special exhibits. We got a Ray Bergman exhibit because we've got one of his rods and one of the first editions of his book. And he's from New York, but most things in the museum are geographically in that area.
Okay, perfect. And so what would be the states or the cities that are a little bit north of that wouldn't be included, some of the big cities?
As soon as you get to Pennsylvania, we don't include that. There is a museum in Pennsylvania, so we don't want to overlap or try not to.
Yeah, so you got a lot. I mean, basically, yeah, it is a lot of that part of the country. You've got a pretty big area. You mentioned Ray Bergman. Remind us again on his book. What was the famous book?
The book's called Trout, and it was written in the 1930s. He covered about 400 flies, a lot of wet flies, but some dry. And he's a very well published individual for, it just happened to be that his nephew lives in the South and donated an exhibit. So we're lucky to have it.
Perfect. let's dig a little bit into the people. So who are some of the people? And I'm not sure if you have like a Hall of Fame or who some of the most famous people in that area that
We do have a Hall of Fame, but the people that are really well known locally that are in the museum is people like Cap Weesey. He was a head of a boys' school, and literally to feed the boys well a few times a month, he would go fly fishing for big browns and bring them in, and they would cook them up for the whole school. There was the Howe brothers that lived in Brevard, and they had a fly shop, and probably one of the best equipped fly shops in the area back in the after the war. And they built rods and were real well known. There was an individual named Mark Cathy. He was one of the first guides in the Smokies. When the park opened, he was for hire, and he would take people in and find all the brook trout streams and so forth. And they called him Uncle Mark. He was probably one of the earliest in our history. And there's some well-known fly tyers. Fred Hall and his wife, Alen, tied and stole flies, lived in Bryson City. And it was kind of a center of fly fishing activity there after the war. After World War II. They were really well known. They created a lot of flies or fly patterns, and almost anything in the Southeast and the Appalachian were extensions of other fly patterns. Like the wolf pattern was extensively copied, as Fred called it the thunderhead, because of the calf tail wings looked like a cloud. And we actually believe that Allaine Hall created these more so, and Fred was the salesman of the two. So those are some of the real deep history people.
So Fred Hall was Fred and his wife. It was Elise.
Alen.
Oh, Alen. Yeah, Allaine Hall.
Yeah.
So the thunderhead was a similar looking to like the royal wolf.
Yes, a thunderhead is a gray body, white calf tail. Typically a woodchuck tail, and just brown hackle, not mixed.
Oh, not mixed. Gotcha.
Yeah.
And were you saying the thunderhead was before or after the royal wolf?
Oh, after, of course.
Gotcha. Okay.
There are a lot of stories about it. There's stories that someone over in Tennessee invented it, and Fred and Alen picked it up. But, we try to present any stories we get on things like that, because nobody knows the true story in a lot of cases.
That's right. And who would be some of the people in the area, in that area, that would be maybe some large names? Like I'm just thinking a couple that I know of. I mean, like Davy Wotton, right? I mean, some of these people around there. Are those folks down in, kind of in your neck of the woods, and are there others out there?
Well, an interesting thing happened. We do have a Hall of Fame, and Lefty is a good example. He's from Maryland. So we claim Lefty, even though he's probably in every museum.
Yeah.
But last year we inducted Davy Wotton into the Hall of Fame. We decided that Southern Appalachian was too narrow for the kinds of people we hear about, particularly in modern times. So we included the Ozarks, and we call it the Southern Fly Fishing Hall of Fame. And Dave Whitlock, of course. We do different categories in the Hall of Fame. We include conservationists and craftsmen, communications, humanities, things like casting for recovery, people that are involved in that. So we've got a pretty good program. We've been doing that 7 years now, I think.
Gotcha. Sounds like some of the other museums. I mean, there's the American Fly Fishing Museum. Are there other smaller fly fishing museums like yours around the country?
Yes, there's the Catskills. Probably the most well-known. The past director, gave me a lot of advice when we were starting up. And there's the Fly Fishing Museum that Fly Fishers International has out in Livingston. They gave me a lot of support when we started up. There's one in Pennsylvania that was more recently started. And of course, the Orvis guys, Perkin, those guys started the American Museum, which is probably the most visited, most well-known. And there's several salmon museums like the one up there at Marguerite.
Gotcha. And so Orvis started the American Fly Fishing Museum.
Yeah, pretty much.
Oh, good. Yeah, I didn't even know that. That's interesting. So that museum, then, if Perk started, hasn't been going along that long, right? I mean, do you know roughly the date when that started?
It could predate him. I don't know for sure. I know that it's probably, it's almost Smithsonian quality. They've been at it a long time, and they have invested a lot in it, and they cover fly fishing worldwide. So.
Yeah, worldwide, right. And that's why your museum is pretty unique, right, in the fact that you have your area. And it sounds like it is bigger than just the Southern Appalachians, right? It sounds like you guys have extended a little bit. Would you say a lot of people see it as, kind of more not fully East Coast, but you've got a lot of the East Coast, right, covered?
Well, the way we look at it, the museum will probably remain geographically the Southern Appalachians, and it may have a few special exhibits beyond that. But the Hall of Fame, we decided to expand because of it's more modern day. And most people that fly fish in the mountains also saltwater fish. So, there's people like Sarah Gardner that's been doing saltwater for years off the North Carolina coast. We would think she's a candidate in the scheme of things. So,
yeah, gotcha. What does that process look like to become a candidate and to be accepted into the Fly Hall of Fame?
There's a nomination form out there on the website. We're getting ready to launch a Hall of Fame website separate so that there's two ways of nominating. And the committee is now people that are already in the Hall of Fame. So it's kind of like pick your brethren. And I think that's a good, appropriate way of doing it. I've tried to stay out of the selection process, but I did plant the first seeds when we got started. In talking to Jim Kroll up at Catskill Museum, he says when you first start, he says you just got to pick them and then go from there. So
yeah,
we had a first batch like that, and then we've done real well since then. We have an induction luncheon every year in Bryson City, and Bryson City is a small town, so we really create an event locally there when we do that.
Right. And what does that event look like when you do that event?
Well, we do a meet and greet and an induction luncheon, and then we usually do a tour of the museum. Oh, I forget. We do loggers and legends the night before. We do a fundraiser at the beer.
Okay. That's right.
That's always done well.
Yeah, exactly.
And generally, we've been raising money for groups like Casting Carolinas, Cast for Recovery. The groups give back through fly fishing. But I think this year we're going to do a fundraiser for the Hall of Fame because we need to do some things to invest more. And so we're going to do a special fundraiser this year.
Today's episode is sponsored by Stonefly Nets, putting quality before quantity with their handcrafted custom wood landing nets. Charleston, South Carolina native Ethan Eigelhart was bitten by the fly fishing bug in 2014 and shortly thereafter started Stonefly Nets. He now lives in the trout-rich waters of the Ozarks and handcrafts some of the sweetest wooden landing nets you'll see. I've been using these Stonefly nets for quite a while now, and I'm excited to dig into another year. Ethan builds these nets custom, and you can select from 4 sizes and many different wood options. For Ethan, fly fishing is a memory created from a morning on a beautiful stretch of water casting a 3-weight bamboo rod that his grandmother gave to his father, and then he passed to Ethan. Ethan is helping us create the same types of lasting memories every time we're on the water with these classic custom wood nets. You can head over right now to wetflyswing.com/stonefly to check out your custom net right now. That's wetflyswing.com/stonefly, STONEFLY. You support this podcast by clicking through that link to Stonefly. Okay, back to the show. So Bryson City, it sounds like that's kind of that's where the museum is. Talk about, what is that city? Take us there if we haven't been there before. What can you expect?
Bryson City, what they're well known for is the whitewater rafting there on the Nantahala Outdoor Center, which is nearby. And so you got a lot of people coming for kayaking and rafting there. They have the Smoky Mountain Railroad, the train. I think somewhere around 200,000 people come and ride that train every year. It's just a tourist train, but it goes through the high bridges in the mountains, and particularly in the fall where they have the autumn leaves. And it goes parallel to the Nantahala River for quite a distance. So that's a big draw. And of course, for the museum, you've got 200,000 possible people to come through the museum. So you've got a good crowd. And before COVID, we had peaked about 18,000 visitors that year. And part of our plan was to build aquariums with, the local native fish and draw the families, particularly the kids. And that way you draw them there and they'd see the museum as well. So that plan is pretty much going to come into full fruition this year when we finish the new building for the museum, which is built exactly beside the aquariums we built just before COVID. So we'll have it all together here pretty soon.
Right on. And that building, so what's that going to look like? What do you think the finished product? So if somebody's thinking about heading out there with the new building, what can they expect?
It's on the river, which is, really kind of a nice part of it. The aquariums are a barn-shaped building. We needed the high ceilings, for humidity problems and stuff. And then the museum part will be a log cabin look. And we had to put in a vaulted ceiling even in that building because we have the first drift boat, McKenzie-style drift boat that was actually built and run in the Southeast. That's kind of our, flagship exhibit. And we're going to raise it up above everyone and make more floor space for other things. So it really is a good chunk of floor space. And so those will be side by side with a breezeway. And we hope that'll get us to the maybe 20, 30,000 people a year visitation. My understanding is the American Museum gets somewhere around 22, 25,000 a year. And we'd like to be in that same category if we can get there. We're close.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah. So if you're close to the American Museum, you guys must be doing some things right. What's been, do you attribute the success to?
Well, part of it's the train that brings a lot of people in. There's a lot of fly fishermen in the Southeast that you might say exhibit some pride about knowing they've got a museum. And they show up. They come to our small mecca in our part of the woods.
Perfect. And I love the drift boat. So do you know the story behind that drift boat?
I do. Gary Taylor and Wanda Taylor were two guides on the boat. Wanda is just world-class angler herself. And I don't think they team up anymore, but Gary had the boat and we spent about a year talking him out of it. He was still using it when we started the museum. And so we helped him purchase a new boat and brought it to Bryson. Well, we brought it to Cherokee originally because we started there.
Right. So, yeah, and Wanda Taylor, and we actually had Wanda on way back in episode 172 before, back in 2020. And, so we know Wanda for sure. But the boat was used, you said this was one of the first, Yes.
There was actually 4 guides that started drift boat fishing in the Southeast and in the Southern Appalachian Mountains. Theo Copeland was one of them. The actual first person was Ronnie Hall, and he still guides. I think he's with Fishhawk in Georgia. He started with John Boat, I think, and actually had a drift boat for a while, but it wasn't in existence anymore for us to get. And Gary Taylor was the second person to start, and he was still operating that drift boat. Kevin Howe ran drift boats down the French Broad, and he was like third, I think, and Theo was fourth with Theo might have been third on the Watauga River in Tennessee. Those 4 guys started it. Yeah.
Yeah, they started. And that was, so in what year was that when the first drift boats?
That was back in the 80s.
Yeah. So before that, before the 1980s, there weren't any mini drift boats out there.
If they were, we didn't know about them, or if they did, they didn't fly fish.
Oh, there you go. Right. So that's basically it. There were no drift boats out. Yeah. And why do you think that was that it took until 1980 to get drift boats out there?
For one thing, our river's pretty shallow, rocky bottom, and rough on boats. And the fly fishermen mostly waded you waded small streams in the mountains. And, someone you might say got entrepreneur and decided, well, I can make a living taking people down the river. And those 4 happen to be the first ones.
There you go. And now do you see like lots of people, lots of drift boats out there?
I was over on the South Holston, Tennessee the other day, and Fly Shop told me there are 80 registered boats on the South Holston going down just about every day.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
That's a big number.
That's a big number. So it's just like anywhere. I mean,
it's a flotilla.
It's a flotilla. It's interesting because, boats are great. We had a whole mini season on drift boats, the history and things. So we're always interested in that. But yeah, it is pretty interesting. And we had, in fact, like John Bond, who is a guide who is actually over in Norway now. He literally flew his drift boat over to Norway because there were no drift boats over there. And he wanted to have it on his guide program. So it seems like you could almost especially with designs, you could almost take a boat anywhere these days.
Yes.
Do you feel? What do the boats look like? Are they just your standard drift boat style?
McKenzie-style.
Yeah, McKenzie.
And then, rafts. A lot of rafts are used because they can handle the rock bottoms a whole lot better.
Oh, yeah. And rafts, of course.
That new fly cast, the long, narrow raft, really, really good for the smaller rivers we have. Little side note, Jack Dennis moved from Jackson Hole, sold his fly shop, and he lives in Cary, North Carolina now. And we've been getting up with him, and he's still going out west and doing some guiding and with his drift boat. He's left his drift boat out there, but we've been looking for a drift boat here somebody owns that he can borrow, and we're getting pretty close on that, so we can explore some other tail races with Jack.
There you go. Yeah, Jack's an awesome guy. We talked to him back in episode 217, and he's probably one of the guys behind a lot of the stuff out there in fly, including Team USA, right? He's done a lot of things out there.
Yes, Amy's aunt.
Amy's aunt, that was his.
Yep.
There you go, Amy's aunt. Perfect. So we got a Jack Dennis shout out, which is good, and there's a ton of questions. Well, let me just say on the Rogue or the McKenzie style, because for those that don't know, I think the big difference between the Rogue style and the McKenzie is that the McKenzie is like a full rocker, right? There's no flat bottom in the drift boat. The Rogue was the other style drift boat, which has a little bit of a wider flat section, which was made for more whitewater, right?
Yeah.
But still down there, you guys have some whitewater. But boats, are people actually taking full like big whitewater with the drift boats?
Oh, yes. Yeah. These guys start young in the East, and the McKenzie style is about the only one that can survive a lot of the banging up that happens down through these tail races. Most of them start with rafts. Of course, rafts have gotten a little expensive now. It's tough for a young fellow to start guiding and having to get everything, all the equipment, insurance, everything to go. So it's a tough business for them.
Yeah, it's not easy. Guiding is definitely, I think, one of the hardest jobs out there. So anything else you want to, I was thinking about the Fly Tyers Guild and some other things. Anything else you want to make sure we don't miss here today as far as what you cover at the museum and what's going on here?
Well, let's see. I can touch on things. The Fly Tyers Guild was meant to be a way of just literally signing up anybody and everybody that ties flies and to what degree they want to be involved in the future with the museum. And we're having a few what they call tires weekends getting scheduled in the Southern Appalachians. One of the fly shops did it over in Tennessee quite a bit. And I think we finally had one on this side of the mountain. So we started the Tires Guild, and that's probably got, 300 or 400 people in it right now. I'd expect it to be over 1,000 easy as we move forward. The interesting thing about having the museum in Bryson City is it's pretty remote in some ways. Fly fishermen like to get into a remote place like that, so it works. But it's on the other side of the mountain from Tennessee, and it's a long trip around the mountain or over the mountain. So we're looking at ways that we can make the museum more accessible. And so a few years ago, I started doing what we call satellite exhibits. And if I could find a space somewhere that was in the public eye, I would put a few museum exhibits duplicated from the museum. And we have 7 of those satellites now. And we're looking seriously at several over in Tennessee. And for that matter, if we can get something in West Virginia or any of these states, we'll do that. And that way, it works two ways. Someone can see part of the museum, whether they can get to Bryson City or not. It also is the perfect promotion tool for advertising the museum, because you can just run into it somewhere else, and it's always there. So we've got one at South Mountain. We've got several in Caldwell County where I grew up. We've got some in Brevard area. Got some there in Bryson City itself. So that's one of the things we've been doing.
Yeah. So satellite. So you're going to have more of these places around. So people, if they're a little bit further up north, they could still connect with the museum.
Absolutely. The Hall of Fame is doing pretty good at getting inductions from the other states. So we're pretty diverse, good number of females. And in fact, Wanda was one of the first, by the way. And she is a big advocate of the Hall of Fame and promotes it.
Yeah. When you look at the American Museum, and I'm interested in this just because I'm trying to get a feel for it, seems like there would be some cross-promotional opportunities. Is that something where you are kind of working with them to help promote what you have going, or they're promoting you, or is it more like through the FFI?
Well, when we started talking about memberships and the reciprocal agreement on being a member of one museum automatically gets you in the other museum. And we've talked about that, but so far we've been just an open museum. We don't charge. We just take donations, and we've run really well that way. When we opened up the aquariums, we talked about having a charge to feed the fish, and we run off donations in the aquariums too. So when you might say 18,000 people come through, they've been very generous, kept the doors open really well. So yeah, we have talked about stuff like that. The American Museum, of course, covers, saltwater and all kinds of fly fishing. And our museum technically doesn't do that except through special exhibits. But we think we'll connect more when we open up the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, that's right. I'm assuming they probably have a Hall of Fame too.
I don't think they do. I think Pennsylvania has one, but I don't think that's not part of the traditions in the Catskills, and I'm not sure about the Catskills, honestly. But the American Museum is, like I keep saying, it's Smithsonian quality.
How would that be different than what you have going? What do you mean by Smithsonian quality?
I think if there's something historical in fly fishing anywhere in the world, they're willing to invest in it, buy it, and get it there. Just like the Smithsonian's done for years. We have operated more off of a donation method. We have a lot of great assets in the museum now, but there's someone behind that had an open heart and wanted it there in the museum.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Yeah, because acquiring it's expensive, right? Acquiring some of this stuff.
Oh, we're up there in the $500,000 to $750,000 million in assets, and we've only been open 5 or 6 years. All donations.
Gotcha. Very cool. Nice. So basically, if somebody was coming there, if they were in the area or wanted to swing by, I mean, it's pretty easy. It doesn't even cost money. You can just drop by, and they're going to see some cool, relic, people, information, all that. When is the new new building opening up?
Let's see. They're in the sheetrock phase right now, so I'm thinking late April.
Oh wow!
We'll be moving, and I think the target is to be open by June when the tourist season starts. The current museum, the hours are a little hazardous because after COVID, the chamber's not been able to build back a staffing to keep it open the hours we used to keep it open. And when we get into the new museum, we've got different contractual arrangements to run it. And it'll run probably off of a similar schedule to the aquariums then.
Gotcha. And I'm just looking down. I wanted to go through to see if I knew any more names on this Hall of Fame list. And I'm actually, at least currently, I don't have as much connection out east. But one big name that sits up is Joe Brooks, of course, right?
Yes.
And
yes,
Joe
absolutely.
was, what was his? Was he in from that area?
Well, he's from the Maryland area. And he was, probably one of the early big communication guys. He really made fly fishing a big thing and saltwater fly fishing. And that's part of the reason we decided the Hall of Fame needed to be broader. Because if if you looked at someone like Joe Brooks that fished in the Southern Appalachians, but he was even bigger in salt water, what story do you tell? You got to tell the whole story. And so the Hall of Fame needed to really look at any fly fisherman from the southern area.
Yeah, exactly.
We say from Texas to Delaware now.
Texas, Delaware, perfect.
For the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, just for the Hall of Fame, right?
Yeah, right.
So you've had I believe a couple books, right? Is the fly fishing, My Fly Fishing Playbook? I think you wrote a book about the museum.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about how those books came to be, and maybe if you have anything else going on out there?
Yeah. Well, I was an IT guy working for Duke Energy. We did, worldwide IT operations. And when I retired, my goal was to write a fly fishing book because I'd been doing it for a long time, thought I was fairly good at it. And when I approached Gretchen Griffith, she's my editor, to do this book, she says, yeah, but you need to write about the museum first, So in fact, she took a white paper I had done and literally handed me the first 4 chapters. And so I spent time telling the story of how we created the museum. It was nothing really planned in life. It just needed to be done, and nobody was doing it. So I took it on. So we got that book out, and of course we sell that at the museum. And then I finally got to do my fly fishing book, and it was long. It's 31 chapters. So we made it an ebook. And one of the board members in the museum did a book called The Fly Fisherman of Caldwell County. And he had promised one of the guys that knew Capweesey real well that he would tell their stories. And so he had a method of getting around to the old guys around the county that fly fished together there post-war. And I think he had 28 people in there. Believe it or not, though, he calls me. I'm from Caldwell County. He says, you got to get your story in there. So, we saw that book get produced, and he did a book signing, and there were some people that didn't make the deadlines and felt like they were left out. And he promised to do another book, and he's gotten up in years and really has lost, you might say, the desire to do the project. And so Gretchen come to me and asked me to pick it up. So I'll be doing a follow-up book for that. As much as I like to fly fish, I'm piddling with writing a little bit here.
Right.
I once had an English professor told me I was the worst writer he had ever known. So I'm proving him wrong, if nothing else.
That's right. Well, that's a great thing about anything, right? You can start off not so great, and you can actually develop the skill. That's the cool thing about it, right?
And I do have a good editor. So
yeah, nice. Good. Well, I think you guys have a really clean, just looking at the website, everything you have going, it's definitely was done really well. And the satellite exhibits are pretty cool. Like you said, you got these other places around. I see how you're kind of connecting the dots. So if somebody wanted to go to your website, flyfishingmuseum.org, they could just pretty much hop on there and maybe set up like a road trip, right? Around the...
That's right.
Yeah. And then you've even got a local area info. You got lodging, restaurants, fishing resources. I could see that being kind of cool, especially if you're new to the area, where you could plan your trip and maybe do some fishing events, some opportunities around. What would be the places if somebody was going to be out there hitting the museum and then they also want to do some fishing? What would you tell them? How do they get started if they're new to the area?
Well, an easy way, of course, go to one of the 2 fly shops in town. Yeah.
Which ones are those? Remind us the 2 in Bryson City.
It's called the, Smoky Mountain Fly Fishing. And the other one is the Tuckasegee Fly Shop.
Oh, okay.
Tuckasegee also has locations in Waynesville and Silva. They both have lots of guides on staff and do all the rivers around there. And include smallmouth. It's not just trout fishing. Smallmouth is a real big thing in the Southern Appalachians.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you guys have awesome opportunities out there.
And if they're just on their own, like someone that's never fly fished, there's the Heritage Water. It goes right through town in Bryson City. And $5? You rent the equipment and go fish. That's part of the North Carolina Wildlife Resource Program. Practically speaking, you can go to the Nantahala or the Tuckasegee rivers. Are the largest. around there. Deep Creek in the Smokies is excellent. You got to do some hiking. Things like Big Snowbird over in Robinsonville. I mean, there's so much trout stream around the museum there. You could, go spend an easy week fishing different water every day. It's the same way where I grew up over in Caldwell County. And, it's interesting. We ended up at Bryson City because we started in Cherokee. The tribe gave us a building to start with. And we ended up a year later needing to move for different reasons. And now we're talking about putting the actual home of the Hall of Fame over in Cherokee. So we'll see what happens. It's all in Swain County.
Quick break for a word from our sponsor. With over 40 years of experience in coffee, the Anglers Coffee team is here to serve you every step of the way, delivering excellent coffee to every single angler. They are responsibly sourced from farms using sustainable growing practices. You can rest easy knowing you are doing your part. And like I've said before, they roast it and they ship it within 48 hours. 48 hours. And I'm actually drinking coffee right now, and it's super late in the evening. And I've got that thing where I can drink coffee and still sleep. Raise your hand if you're like me. But I definitely love coffee, and Anglers is the coffee that I love most. And it's no brainer. Anglers is doing good stuff, giving back to great companies, great fly fishing companies, great conservation groups, and they have probably the best coffee out there. So it's a pretty easy call. If you want to step it up a bit, this is it. This is a pretty easy one to do. This is like, this is kind of like your 1% for the planet, Anglers coffee style. With a blend for every taste, a dry dropper on the go tea bag option, and a roast sampler, Joe and the Anglers team has you covered. It's time to step up to better coffee and more impact for the fish species and causes we all love. Head over to wetflyswing.com/anglers right now to get a great bag of greatness to your door. That's Anglers, ANGLERS. Let's make a change today for great coffee.
We talked about a few people, Dave Whitlock, who passed away, recently, and there's some other big names out there. Were there some folks that influenced you, over the last 42 years in your fly fishing that are people we might know of?
Yeah. Some of those names, I grew up with their stories. And that was a big influence. But a guy named Jim Cassida, he's in the Hall of Fame. He's a writer. And Don Kirk, they wrote a lot of stories about fly fishing in the Smokies. And eventually I got to know them. Don especially, we put him in the Hall of Fame last year. He passed away about 2 weeks before we had the induction because we, had to keep rescheduling because of COVID. But Don actually started his own Hall of Fame in the South. He called it Legends of the Fly. He would actually have the inductions at the fly fishing show in Atlanta. And Don thought it would upset me to compete, but I said, no, you're creating history for the museum. So when he passed away, one of the things I had promised him was that we would recognize all of the inductees that he had put in place. And so he especially had an influence on me. And another guy, Jim Dean, he was the editor of Wildlife Magazine in North Carolina. And to read his stories, he had a column every issue of the magazine for 20 or 30 years. He would talk about these trout streams and not name them. They were secrets. Of course, I knew where he went and I knew the streams. And it was so enjoyable to, read his stories and understand what he got out of fly fishing. So people like that have a big influence. And I see his son, Scott, at least once a year when they gather up around Edgemont. They do an opening day, pre-opening day gathering there. They used to do bluegrass. I'm not sure what they're doing, but they get together and huddle before they go to opening day. And opening day is kind of a tradition more than it is anything else for fly fishermen because we fish wild streams year round.
Gotcha. That is great. Yeah, I mean, the influences, it's cool to hear. I hadn't heard of those people, and the Legends of the Fly. That's really good. Do you steal the shows? Do you head out to the shows and do the thing at the Atlanta show or any of that stuff?
I've gotten a little lax since COVID, kind of gotten into more family things need to do in the last few years. My granddaughter's in high school now. But I used to work the fly fishing shows, several of them, for the museum, on behalf of the museum. And I think it's paid off. You don't run into many people in the Southeast that fly fish that don't know about the museum.
Yep. That's right. No, it's really awesome. I love that you're doing it. That was one of the questions I guess I've alluded to a little bit, but just, it sounds like it's a lot of work, like a lot of this stuff. And, just thinking like, why do you do it? I could take a couple of guesses, but what keeps you going?
Well, for one thing, I'm a good delegator. I have a lot of help.
Yep.
What keeps me going is I'm very passionate about fly fishing. My wife is understanding. And, when you get to know people, literally, I know a lot of people in Bryson City, and Bryson City is 3 hours from where I live, so it brings people together, and it's just rewarding to do that. When I arrive in Bryson City, people treat me like I live there, and that's nice.
Yep, that is nice. Nice. Well, I think we'll take it out here really quick. I want to check on, just how we can help if people are listening here and they want to get involved or help with the museum. But let's do the 2-minute drill really quick, and we'll take it out here with a couple of quick one random question and a couple of easy ones for you. Does that sound good?
Sure.
All right. So I always like to start out with something with, kind of a quote, and this isn't always easy because it's kind of on the spot, but think about that. Do you have a person, a quote, or something that you kind of think about as you're, working out there with the museum or in fly fishing that kind of, is something that resonates with you?
If you build it, they will come.
So that's true. So that one's actually true.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So why do the people say that isn't true? You say if they build it right, you hear that sometimes that's actually not true.
Well, some people like to fish so much they just can't get out of the water to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they will come. That's the cool thing about this is like you're saying, you're planning on having as much traffic as the American Fly Fishing Museum, right? That's pretty much you agree. That's
to look up to and be proud of. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Do you listen to more music? I know you've been on at least one other podcast, or do you listen to some podcasts out there?
I'm not a big listener to podcasts. I guess I'm old school, watch TV a lot. The Jesse Brown's does a radio show, and I've been on the radio show quite a bit. The good thing is they record it because it plays early in the morning, like 5 o'clock or something like that.
There you go.
But they've been a big help to promote it. And, that's where I got my start. I started tying flies there at Jesse Brown. So, yeah.
Oh, so Jesse Brown's is a shop?
It's an outdoor shop, but they do have a fly shop section. Yep. And they're downtown. They're South Charlotte.
Oh, good. Okay. Yeah. Jesse Brown's perfect. We'll get a link out to that one as well.
Yep.
What is your, so thinking about, sounds like that area pretty well. Do you have another big trip you're looking at doing in the future that you'd love to get out to, whether that's, more Atlantic salmon or anything like that?
What I really long to do is come down here and fish for redfish in Georgetown at Wignon Bay. Haven't planned any big trips lately. We're at a point where granddaughter's starting to look at colleges, and we've been going to the ball games and all that every week. And we hadn't planned it. We just getting our passports renewed and coming out of COVID, you might say. So Jack has invited us to come out and float for a week, and when he does his 60 days out there, so we might join him and do that. We'll
what are his 60 days?
He said his wife and he agreed that he could go down the river 60 days while he's out there.
Right. So that's awesome. 60 days in a row.
He moved to the Carolinas to be with the grandkids and all that, but he's having a hard time weaning his Western roots.
Roots. There you go. That's interesting. I remember him talking about that when he mentioned that I think he had just moved out there, and he was talking about why, he did it for the kids. And I said that at the time, like that says a lot about the person, right? That he's willing to leave what he's always loved his life to be with the family, right? That's, pretty powerful. It sounds like
that's the community that is out in that part, like North Carolina, that part of the country. Do you feel like it's a very family-oriented place to live?
Yes, very much, very much.
Yeah. What do you think makes it? Why do you think that is? Just it's just kind of that Southern hospitality, and the people are so.
Well, it used to be Southern hospitality, but we've got so many people that's moved down from the north. It's a real mix now.
Right. So the good and the bad.
Horns.
You're getting both.
They blow horns at each other a lot more than they used to.
Oh, really? Oh, that's no good.
But yeah, Jack's one little quickie story.
Yeah.
The first time I went out west, I went into his fly shop there in Jackson Hole, and we were tying Henry Fort hoppers and elk hair caddis, stuff like that. And he says, let me show you something. And he took me to the back, and he gave me a patch of bleached elk hair. And back then, it was just not well known that you could take elk hair and lighten it up like that and not make it real brittle. And he gave me a patch of that elk hair, didn't charge me for it or anything. And I remember that to this day. You go out there and a guy in the fly shop just is nice, give you on a good hint and move you forward. So we've talked about that story a few times since.
That's it. That's what it's all about. I've heard a lot of those stories now over the years you hear sometimes those stories, and those shops are usually around, or those people. Then you hear the other stories about the people that weren't so friendly, and almost always that those shops are never around, right? It's that. Yeah,
that's right. They'll eventually fall. The whole museum is about making sure those stories are there. And it's difficult at times because, people pass away and other people don't remember them and things like that. But if you can capture those, that's the essence of what it's all about.
Yeah, and that's what was exciting for me about doing this episode when we first talked, is that, obviously that's what we're all about here, is telling the stories, right? And teaching and helping people, but also the stories. That is, so for me to talk to you, and you dedicated a chunk of your life to telling stories from all the people out there, it's pretty amazing. And I haven't actually been specifically to that area, so it's one of those things that's exciting for me too, because it gives me an opportunity eventually to get out there, check out the museum, and this is good. Well, so what can people do if they're listening right now and they want to help out, or join or connect? What would you tell them? What's their one thing they could do today?
Pass the word. Talk about it. Let people know about it. We certainly get enough people visiting North Carolina, and we like our trout streams without them, but they're welcome. They can come and fish with us.
Perfect. All right. Well, we'll help get the word out, and hopefully we'll send a few people out to the new place this summer. And if we can get out there, I'll definitely stop by and say hi as well. And then it's flyfishingmuseum.org, right?
Yes. That's it.
Perfect, Alan. Well, I think we'll leave it there. We've got a bunch of other things I could touch base on, but I think we'll leave that until the next one we get you on. Maybe we'll do an update episode down the line to see how things are going with the new place. And until we talk again, appreciate all your time.
Sure. Enjoy it.
There it is. wetflyswing.com/442. 442 if you want to check out that drift boat, take a look at a few of the photos of what this museum looks like inside, and just get some links out to what we talked about today. I mentioned the schooloffishing.co. That's schooloffishing.co. You can find out where we're heading next on our travel program, which giveaways are coming up next, and also we have an ambassadors program. So if you want to find out more about this and find out how you can get involved some of these trips that we have going with the school, that's the easiest way. You can check out anytime. schooloffishing.co. Quick listener shout out before we get out of here. Reagan Kenyon has been checking in with us on email, and the last one he sent, he mentioned, he said, Dave, doing a great job, great episodes. Was listening to the Tim Flagler talk on trout spay. He says you should try to get Jeff from Pureaway Rods on. He's definitely on the cutting edge of trout spay and all the good stuff with Jerry French. And yes, that is a good one. I think we may have noted this in the past, but we have Jeff Pureaway. We're going to get him on, and he is going to be involved in one of the upcoming events we're doing. So excited to deliver that one for you, Reagan, and thanks again for all the emails. Really appreciate you checking in. I know you sent one, another follow-up with some guests that I'm going to have on, and one of those guys I'm just checking out, another one you mentioned here, was Greg Liu. Looks really interesting up on the Salmon River. So we're going to work on that. If you're listening now and you want to get a shout-out on this podcast episode like Reagan, You can reach out to me, Dave, at Wet Fly Swing anytime. Just let me know if you haven't checked in for a while, or if you're new to the show. Easy way to send me an email or check in on social and just let me know that you're listening to the show. Always love to hear from people that are out there. Okay, you want to take a quick look at where we are heading next? Where are we heading next? Man, next week we got another great week. We got a DIY Europe fishing trip. This is a really fun one. We got somebody who's traveling around in a camper, and we get his perspective on fly fishing Europe. We've got Steve Potter on, who's going to dig into some on his fly tying. We're going to touch on Daiichi. And later that week, we've got the Great Lakes Dude podcast number 2. Jeff Liskay coming at you. This is going to be a steelhead episode focused, and I can't wait to get that one out as well and listen to that next week. So we're jamming along. We got a full schedule on the docket, and what have I been doing lately? I recently listened to a documentary. You might want to check this out if you're a Beatles fan. I think it came out a couple years ago, but it's called Get Back, and it's a story of how they put together that. You've probably seen it, the Beatles, if you know them, that rooftop concert. And I would love to put this. Actually, I probably will. I'm going to put this in the show notes just so you hear it, because I've been listening. And Get Back. One of the songs from that, probably Get Back. They had a couple of good ones. We'll have that video in the show notes. All right, I'm going to get out of here. I hope you are having a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good evening wherever you are in the world. And I appreciate you for stopping in today, checking out the show. And if you get a chance to share out there, I would appreciate that as well. Talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show. For notes and links from this episode, visit wetflyswing.com.